Welcome to One on One. I'm Rick Alessandri. One on One is where we speak with some of sports media and sports technology's top leaders. Today, we're joined by William Mao. Will is the Senior Vice President of Octagon's Global Media Rights Consulting Division. Will is one of the leading sports media rights experts with more than a decade of global experience across linear TV and streaming. He has a proven track record of helping organizations achieve record-breaking goals and innovative business solutions in highly competitive markets. Will is able to leverage Octagon's proprietary data, research, and technology to advise and provide strategic consultation to rights holders, distribution platforms, technology companies, and the investment community. Will's clients are a who's who in global sports, including the NFL, Major League Baseball, NASCAR, numerous European leagues, Tennis Australia, the ACC, and the Big Ten Conference, to name a few. Prior to joining Octagon, Will was Vice President of Digital at MP and Silva, and before that, he was head of college sports for YouTube, where he established the first of its kind digital video partnerships with the NCAA and the Pac-12 Conference. He's a recognized authority on the intersection of sports and media, having been named a 30 under 30 in sports by Forbes, and is a recipient of the Synopsis Media Rising Star Award. Will, thanks for joining us on One on One today.
Absolutely, Rick. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that very kind introduction.
Will, you truly cover the globe in terms of sports, with half of your clients in the U.S. and the other half outside. Today, you also do a significant amount of work in global football or soccer, and have recently done quite a bit in the ever-changing college sports landscape. So, a simple question to start with. Who's your favorite client to work with?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
I'm just kidding. I'm not going to put you on the
love
spot.
them all. I love them all. What I love most is the interesting challenges that they each uniquely are trying to solve, right? And that's really what is super unique and interesting, I would say, about the role we play as media rights advisors, is being able to work with different organizations, whether they're rights holders, investors, even platforms in some cases, and also trying to tackle problems in different markets, as you said, not just in the U.S., but really globally.
Can you, obviously you work across a variety of projects and initiatives. Can you provide a bit more context in terms of what Octagon's consulting group does in terms of the projects you're working on and how you work across the global landscape?
For sure. Happy to do so. Most people probably know Octagon from one of two things, right? Talent representation, representing the likes of a Stephen Curry, a Giannis, a Michael Phelps, or our long-standing partnerships and advisory of some of the biggest spenders on the brand and sponsorship side in sports, the likes of a MasterCard, an AB InBev, or a Home Depot in the college athletic space. What we do on the media rights side is kind of lean more towards that latter piece, the advisory side, in the same way that we leverage a lot of the data and information that Octagon is availed of as part of Interpublic Group in service of brands and helping them figure out what their investments should be and how to activate across sports and entertainment as platforms. We take a lot of those same building blocks and apply them to media rights or the broadcast rights for properties and sports leagues around the world. And so in that capacity, we play two general roles. One is we kind of work, let's call it behind the scenes, right? When it comes to rights valuation, viewership analysis, market analysis, what's going on in the telco sector in Central Europe compared to what's going on in Southeast Asia, what's going on from a broadcast perspective in different markets. A lot of that behind the scenes work to help with market intelligence, to level set what's going on in a marketplace and what perhaps your strike price should be from a negotiation perspective for your rights. And then, as I said, the other half of that is that sales capacity side of the equation, where oftentimes we are tasked with and given the remit to help renegotiate broadcast rights or broker new deals in new markets for properties, particularly on the international side of their business.
Great. That's good context. And I know you're very active on X. You always are tweeting. I don't even know what the equivalent is now that it's X, but you're always tweeting quite a bit in terms of insights, trends, sports trends, and obviously the incredible growth and momentum of women's sports has been a story for the past year or so, and we've seen what's happening with both the NWSL and this year's NCAA women's basketball tournament. In fact, the numbers are in from Monday night's game, Iowa LSU Elite Eight matchup, and it was ESPN's most watched women's college basketball game ever with 12.3 million viewers. The stats are just ridiculous. The most watched college game ever in the history of ESPN as well, more than doubling it from the Duke NC game, years 2008, I believe. Are you as bullish on women's sports, and is this growth sustainable?
Absolutely. I've been a long sort of fan of the growth of women's sports, and that number that we saw for Monday night's Elite Eight matchup between Iowa and LSU. We had done some analysis. Our team, really a nod to the director on our group, Justin Beitler, who surmised that look, when it comes to Iowa women's basketball of late, they usually over-index relative to that round's average by 5 to 6x. And lo and behold, that would have suggested a number in the 12 plus range on this broadcast on Monday night. And it actually happened, right? And I think that blew everybody's expectations. But that just sets the precedent, the standard that, like, look, if you build it, they will come. That's always been a lot of the mantra of advocates of women's sports. So, like, if you give us an opportunity, we will demonstrate that we can drive audience, we can drive commercial value. We're going to bring key demographics that you care about, and people will support our sports. And that is if not the most emblematic example of that, I don't know what else would be. And to that point, I recently penned an op-ed for Sportica where I talked about the same idea. Where yes, there's been over the last since 2021, every game of the Women's March Madness tournament has been broadcast in its entirety on ESPN. That's really just the tip of the iceberg here. There's still a lot of pay layer that hasn't been mined by broadcasters, and that's really in the regular season, where right now, if you look at it from a men's versus women's national TV coverage perspective, it's roughly 6-1 in Division I, and even on the high end, it's only 3 or 4-1 from a ratio perspective. So there's still a lot of opportunity for the market to really expand on and build upon the momentum that Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and the rest of the current players have brought to the industry.
Are you seeing the rise in women's sports on a global perspective as well?
Yeah, we're seeing data points in other markets as well. I think you brought up NWSL here with their recent deal, and obviously the value of some of the expansion franchises. Similarly, you're seeing that in markets like the UK, right, with their WSL property as well. I think long, when it comes to basketball in some European markets on the women's side has long been a established and valued property in those marketplaces. So there's definitely data points, not just in the US, but globally, that should signal that this is a global tide, maybe led in part by a lot of what's going on in the US, but definitely a global phenomenon.
So if Iowa gets past UConn and South Carolina gets past their next game, what are you projecting, or have you guys projected out what the game might rate, or how many viewers there might be on broadcast, because it'll be on ABC as opposed to ESPN? Are you anticipating a big number there as well?
I never say never, but I think it will be tougher and tougher to continue that 5 to 6x multiple, particularly with fewer games and more of the games already kind of having some of that Iowa and Caitlin Clark value from last year, given that they were in the final last year. I think the key thing to look at when you check the tape or do the Monday morning quarterbacking or Tuesday morning quarterbacking in the case of March Madness is to look at the ratio between the peak to peak between the men's and the women's tournament. That's always an interesting indicator that we try to mark, right? Which is to say, look, if the men's tournament final generates 10, what does the women's final generate? What's that imply about potential growth, but also how that ratio is getting closer and closer. And that's translated a lot into how people have appreciated the value of the women's basketball rights within that NCAA 30 plus 40 plus championship portfolio.
I think Commissioner Engelbert is salivating at the chance to get both Caitlin and Angel back into the WNBA over the next coming months.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about the most proximate thing on their schedule, which is the WNBA draft. I think last year it was pretty, not maybe not 100% certain, but pretty certain who the number one pick was going to be, and there was still that great consumption and viewership just because of the groundswell around women's basketball. I think it's long been assumed that Caitlin Clark is going to Indiana, but even then, I think just the kind of large group of notable women's players that are going to be making the jump from college to pro will definitely bode well for what that number will be this year on draft night.
It'll be interesting to see if the NBA uses Ionescu and Clark next year against Steph and someone in a 2-on-2 3-point shooting contest.
Absolutely, I can see it now.
Yes, it was an exciting part of that weekend, to tell you the truth. What are some of the other big sports trends and stories you're seeing around the globe today?
I think one of the things that, whether you're a established, let's call it larger tier 1, tier 2 property in any given market, particularly in the US, let's say, or you're an upstart property, a niche property that's still in your initial years of development, I think everybody has an eye on what's going on in terms of the migration of content from linear to streaming. And also just the fact that it seems like more and more streamers are getting into sports in different ways, right? And by that I mean, it's not just an ESPN Plus. You have the general entertainment platforms like a Paramount Plus, a Peacock, a Max even now, right? Really getting into the sports space, and even Netflix, even though it was maybe more episodic driven, getting into it with WWE and some of their own spun up properties, right? And so that is always going to be kind of something on everybody's mind, because there seems to be an opportunity economically there to create and drive additional value. I think the counterpoint to that we're also monitoring in markets such as the U.S. is there a plateauing in terms of the number of subscription services each individual or each household is willing to subscribe to at the same time, because at some point, if these properties aren't helping to drive incremental subs or retain subs, then sort of the capacity to spend on them when it comes to these streaming platforms, and I didn't even yet mention the Amazons, the Apples, and the YouTubes of the world, they're very much KPI and data driven.
Yeah. One of your jobs is obviously to maximize the rights of leagues and properties you represent. That said, there's always a balance in terms of negotiation skills and ensuring that both parties walk away feeling good about the deal, the final deal, and then moving forward. What advice can you offer about your negotiation style, how to maximize an asset's value, but at the same time ensure that you and the partner are now aligned moving forward to build?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one, quite frankly, that when we are speaking with potential clients, potential rights holders that are looking for third party or outside advisory help, whether it's behind the scenes or in a negotiation capacity, that's definitely a key question they ask us. Like, what do you think? How do you approach these conversations? And for us, in some ways, we try to be as transparent and forthright as possible. We don't try to just kind of go into it saying one number that we don't necessarily believe is achievable, but at the same time, we remain always bullish on properties that we work with, because we want to see them succeed. But when it comes to the negotiations, the two kind of key pillars that every property really thinks about is revenue or reach, right? Is it an economic maximizing decision, or are there other commercial levers that depend on the distribution, the broadcast of the league on traditional media, for example, that you have to bear in mind, because if you take that away, then it really impacts, let's say, your sponsorship business, or even downstream can impact your attendance figures. And so it's always about having a open and active conversation between us and the rights holders that we represent in terms of what is their kind of primary priority, or what's 1A and what's 1B if they're both primary priorities. And then when it comes to the actual negotiation, look, we can run as much data and analysis as you want. But ultimately, it's a little bit, that's the science of it. But negotiations are both art and science, and the art comes in maybe some things that aren't as easily quantifiable in terms of broadcasters' needs at that particular time. A great example would be think about over the last couple of years, let's say the last 4 or 5 years, when a lot of these traditional media networks were spinning up their streaming platforms, right? The launch of ESPN Plus, the launch of Paramount Plus when it wasn't even called Paramount Plus yet, or all the different iterations of what is now Max. Think about the need for content volume and things that will drive subscriber acquisition at that time, maybe compared to now where you have a base of subscribers and now you're looking for incremental. You're looking for things that you don't have in your portfolio. You're looking for subscribers and demographics you don't already have in your portfolio relative to whatever you've already acquired from a rights perspective. That will dictate a different orientation towards negotiations from the broadcaster side. And the last thing I'll say is, candidly, sometimes our role is to kind of be the one that is pushing the envelope, is trying to get as much on whatever dimension we're talking about, and quote unquote maybe being more so the bad guy, but also relying on the fact that in some cases with a lot of these broadcasters, we've had the good fortune and opportunity to negotiate with them on multiple rounds across multiple properties. So there's a trust built there. But ultimately, if we have to be the one that is kind of playing the hardball per se, ultimately at the end of the day, it's a partnership between the league and their broadcaster. And so you want that relationship to continue to be positive, whether it's a first year of a new deal or the extension or renewal of a longstanding relationship.
Yeah. Are there any emerging properties that you believe have legs in terms of that you're looking at or that you've talked to or that you are watching from afar saying, pickleball or any other emerging sports entities out there that you're paying attention to today?
Yeah, I think I'll highlight maybe a couple. One is, staying in that kind of college world, since that was kind of the first question we really touched upon with the women's basketball package. I would say there's some other sports in that NCAA championships package that includes 30 or 40 different championships that we think could have the volume and the scale to really, if given sort of that accelerant of greater exposure and greater investment across all dimensions, could really start to pop as well, is baseball and softball, right? Think about the sheer volume of college World Series or the softball World Series within the NCAA package. Think about that period of time in the year where there isn't as much of the, let's say, football and basketball that you have to program already. Then so there's a little bit more open room to program and run with it. I think that's one that could have great potential. And then sort of outside of that world, think about all the things that are coming to the U.S. from a major tentpole perspective. Obviously, World Cup, even FIFA Club World Cups, Olympics. But at the end of the decade, you got rugby coming here in terms of the Rugby World Cup. And I think I'm a little biased in that. I spent some time in London and played a little bit when I was out there. But I'm very bullish on that sport as well.
Great. You've obviously had an outstanding career in sports. But you didn't start there. So you transitioned into sports. Any advice that you would offer for somebody looking to kind of break into sports?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I appreciate you asking it, because I did, it wasn't my first job out of college, even though I did do some internships in sports when I was in college. But a great piece of advice I got when I was interning in college, I spent one summer interning for IMG, was, I talked with, the agents and the other business development people that I was interning for and asking them for advice, like, what should I do? I'm interested in this industry. If it's someone kind of coming right out of college, for example, I think it's learn professional skills, right? Even if it's in a different industry. So, my first job out of college was working in sort of the traditional management consulting space, working in the financial services industry, advising banks, brokerages, credit card companies about revenue strategy. I think a lot of those same skills functionally and also how to think strategically that I learned, nearly 20 years ago, I still apply today in a very overt and day-to-day fashion from a technical skills perspective. And then as you do get an opportunity to then translate those skills demonstrated in another industry into the sports space, then you can build some of that maybe industry subject matter expertise. And when you're in that position, then it's about like always being open to meeting people, having conversations, never being shy about asking questions, and then reading. There's definitely more so today than ever, so many resources where you can really keep up with what's going on in the marketplace and really learn about anything you're interested in a very in-depth level. So I think it's being willing to and always mindful to keep learning and keep understanding what's going on in our marketplace.
Yeah, curiosity is so key. Can always, even to this day, I'm still curious about opportunities and learning new things. And I think anybody breaking into this industry, that is going to be critical for them. Everyone wants to be in sports. Listen, we're lucky. We're lucky to be in this industry. It is a wonderful industry, and there are many of my friends out there who are jealous that I'm in it and they're not. But it's tough to break in. You got to keep plugging away.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
We're headed down. We're at the Final Four of both tournament. Any predictions from your part who the national champions will be?
Well, I think one interesting thing that's super cool, and I know I'm not the first to say it, is in both the men's and women's bracket, you have two institutions that are fielding teams in both brackets, right? With NC State and UConn. As you mentioned, we do some work with the Atlantic Coast Conference. I definitely have a rooting interest for the Wolfpack on both sides of the bracket. So hope they do well. But I think for everybody's benefit, I think the fact that you have kind of this mix of representation across conferences when you look at who's made the Final Four, I think that bodes well for the health of Division I basketball as a whole. And so I just want good games. I want good games that are close, that are exciting. I'm sure broadcasters would love if maybe even some of them went into overtime a little bit, particularly that final, maybe less so the semifinal. But other than that, and that's what I'm rooting for.
Great. Well, we'll see how this plays out over the weekend and on Monday. Listen, Will, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. What you and Daniel Cohen have built at Octagon has been really remarkable because it's not that long, and yet you've really carved out an incredible spot in this global industry.
Thanks again for having me, Rick.